It began, as many things in wartime did, with a simple request wrapped in urgency. The United States Army, preparing for a conflict it could already sense on the horizon, issued a call in the summer of 1940. They needed a new kind of vehicle, light, fast, and tough enough to cross the unpredictable terrains of a global war. The specifications were brief but uncompromising. 4-wheel drive, under 1,300 pounds, capable of climbing grades, crossing streams, carrying soldiers, and doing it all without complaint. It was a mechanical wish list built on the edge of impossibility. Fewer than 3 months later, a squat little machine with high wheels and a square face rolled out of a small workshop in Butler, Pennsylvania. It was the Bantam reconnaissance car, the first to meet the Army's call. But what began there did not end with Bantam. Within weeks, Willys, Overland, and Ford were called to improve upon the design, to refine it, to make it fit for the enormous scale of production the war would demand. And so began the story of the Willys MB and the Ford GPW, two names stamped into steel, but forever remembered as one, the Jeep. In the beginning, no one called it that officially. The term Jeep floated around military slang, sometimes meaning any small, untested vehicle, sometimes a reference to Popeye's cartoon companion Eugene the Jeep. But in the mud of training grounds and the dust of convoy trails, the name stuck. The soldiers called it the Jeep, and that was that. The name became inseparable from the thing itself. As the war gathered momentum, so too did production. In factories from Toledo to Dearborn, the Jeep came to life on roaring assembly lines. Rows of bare steel frames moved steadily forward, engines dropping in from above, axles, leaf springs, seats bolted down by men in overalls with sleeves rolled up past the elbow. The air smelled of oil, hot metal, and urgency. Somewhere in the distance, the radio carried news from Europe, from the Pacific. The very front lines these machines would soon reach. Archival photographs show them in their hundreds, lined up like soldiers themselves. Fresh from the line, hoods open for inspection, numbers stenciled, stars painted white on olive drab. The Willys MB and the Ford GPW, almost identical twins, differing only in a few parts, yet united in purpose. They were the shape of mobility in war, and mobility was everything. When American forces began landing across the world, in the deserts of North Africa, in the jungles of the Pacific, in the cold mud of Europe, the Jeep was already waiting for them. It rode on flatbeds, rolled off ships, and within hours was bouncing down dirt roads where no ordinary car could go. It hauled stretchers, carried generals, pulled artillery, dragged planes into position, and ferried messages under fire. There are photographs in the National Archives, the kind that feel like frozen breath. A Jeep cutting through sand dunes in Tunisia, another splashing through knee-deep water near Guadalcanal, its windshield folded flat, soldiers crouched low as if the small machine could somehow make them invisible. There's another. General Eisenhower leaning against a Jeep's fender, the vehicle beside him so unassuming, yet utterly central to his command. Eisenhower later called it one of the 3 decisive weapons of World War II. Not because it killed, but because it carried, because it endured. That was the secret of the Jeep. It didn't win battles by force of firepower, but by sheer persistence. Its heart was a small but stubborn engine, the Willys Go Devil, a 2.2-liter 4-cylinder that could drag its weight through mud, up rock and across plains with uncomplaining steadiness. The design was spare, almost humble. Flat fenders for sitting or mounting gear. A windshield that folded down. Simple levers for the transfer case and gearbox. Every line of its body seemed shaped not by style but by function. It was a machine built to be repaired in the field with whatever was at hand, wire, tape, or a hammer. Soldiers joked that you could strip it down and rebuild it blindfolded. Some probably did. When parts broke, and they often did, the men adapted. The Jeep was a canvas for improvisation. Field photos show them patched with tin, lashed with rope, painted with names and crude art. A Jeep could become an ambulance, a communications truck, a mobile command post, or even a weapon. In Italy, soldiers mounted machine guns in the back. In Burma, they fitted them with stretchers for the wounded. In the Philippines, they lashed bamboo poles to their frames to carry extra men. Everywhere it went, it absorbed a little of the landscape and the people who drove it. In the deserts, dust coated its gears like flour. In Europe, mud baked onto its fenders. In the islands of the Pacific, salt air ate into its bolts. But the little engines kept turning. It rattled, it squeaked, it leaked, but it did not quit. There's a kind of poetry in that, the way something so mechanical could feel so alive. Perhaps it was because the Jeep reflected the men who rode it, ordinary, resourceful, built for endurance more than glory. The Jeep became, in time, a kind of mirror, a rolling expression of the American soldier's character. Simple, tough, adaptable. It asked for little, gave everything. In a war defined by machinery, tanks, planes, ships, it was the smallest of them all that left one of the deepest marks. If you look at the wartime newsreels, you'll see them everywhere, zipping past tanks, threading through columns of infantry, ferrying messages to the front. The camera often lingers on them not because they were spectacular, but because they were constant. The background hum of movement. The war was mobile because the Jeep made it so. Over 600,000 were built before the end of the war. An astonishing number, each one virtually identical, each one a node in a vast, synchronized network of production. The Willys plant in Toledo, the Ford plant in Michigan, and dozens of subcontractors across the country kept the flow going day and night. Workers came in under blackout shades, their hands blistered, their backs aching. Many were women. The same faces we see in photographs of riveters and welders. They didn't just build planes and ships. They built the Jeeps, too. There's something quietly noble about those images. Women in factory aprons, guiding engine blocks into place, tightening bolts. They might never have seen the faraway places these vehicles would go, but their fingerprints traveled in everyone. When the war finally ended, and those who survived returned home, the Jeep came with them, in memory and in metal. Many were sold off to farmers and ranchers who saw in them what the soldiers already knew, a tool that could do nearly anything. In post-war photographs, the same Jeeps that once crossed battlefields now plowed snow, hauled logs, herded cattle. Their paint faded, their military numbers worn down, but their spirit intact. And so the Jeep's transformation began, from a weapon of war to a machine of peace. Willys, eager to keep production alive, rebranded it for civilian life. The CJ, civilian Jeep, was born. It still had the same boxy frame, the same tough little engine, but now it carried plows instead of rifles, fence posts instead of ammunition. The design hardly changed because, truthfully, it didn't need to. The war had already perfected it. Yet even as it entered peacetime, the Jeep never fully shed its military soul. Every turn of its wheels seemed to carry a whisper of the past, the distant rumble of convoys, the echo of orders shouted through rain and smoke. To own one, even decades later, was to own a piece of that endurance. There's an archival image, a soldier sitting on a Jeep's hood, smoking quietly, boots muddy,
the war around him momentarily still. He's looking off into the distance, maybe at nothing, maybe at everything. The Jeep beneath him is just a machine, but together they seem like two survivors sharing the same breath. In many ways, that was the Jeep's legacy. It wasn't the most beautiful nor the most powerful, but it was faithful. It stayed where it was needed most, without question or complaint. For soldiers, that meant everything. In the chaos of war, dependability was a kind of love. As the years went by, the Jeep's silhouette became a symbol of something larger, not just American industry, but a certain ideal of practicality and endurance. It appeared in parades, in post-war movies, in dusty garages where veterans tinkered with them long after the fighting was done. They taught their sons how to change the oil, how to shift in low gear, how to respect the machine. And somewhere in that ritual, memory and metal fused into one.
The Jeep also became an export of a different kind, not as a weapon, but as an idea. Allied nations adopted it. Civilians adapted it. The world looked at this small, square vehicle and saw a piece of America that wasn't about glamour, but about grit. It symbolized a kind of democracy in design, accessible, honest, unpretentious. When you compare it to modern Jeeps, the ones gleaming in showrooms today with touchscreen panels and climate control, you can still trace the lineage. The 7-slot grille, the upright stance, the open fenders, all echoes of that wartime ancestor. The difference lies not in shape, but in soul. The original Jeep wasn't designed for comfort or speed. It was built to endure, to cross rivers, to climb hills, to keep moving long after reason said stop. Modern versions may be smoother, more refined, but somewhere beneath the layers of polish and plastic, that same stubborn spirit still hums. In museums and collections, you can still find restored Willys MBs, their paint carefully matched to olive drab number 319, their canvas seats restitched, their metal still carrying faint dents from old journeys. When the engine turns over, there's a rawness to the sound, a kind of mechanical honesty you rarely hear now. You can almost imagine the echoes of boots climbing aboard, the distant calls of orders through static-filled radios, the wind cutting across a convoy road. For those who once drove them, the memory remains vivid. Veterans have spoken about how the Jeep felt almost alive, how it rattled and complained but never quit, how it seemed to carry them through fear itself. For many, it was their first taste of a machine that felt like a companion, not a tool. And when they remember the war, it's not just the battles or the faces. It's the hum of the engine, the vibration underfoot, the smell of oil and dust. The Jeep, in its small, stubborn way, became a companion in survival. There's a quiet truth there that sometimes history is not carried by the grand or the glamorous, but by the simple and the steady. The Jeep didn't shout its importance. It just kept moving, through rain and mud and fire, and by doing so, it earned its immortality. In the decades that followed, Jeep became a brand, a business, an identity. But beneath all that, the original still lingers like an old photograph. Edges faded, yet image clear. It's more than nostalgia. It's recognition. That something built in desperation and purpose ended up embodying endurance itself. When you stand beside one today, an original Willys or Ford GPW, it feels smaller than you might expect. The seats are cramped, the engine simple, but then you remember what it did, where it went, what it carried. Suddenly, the smallness becomes something else, proof of efficiency, of purpose distilled to its essence. You see in its metal not just a machine, but a story of factories, soldiers, mud, and movement.
and when the light hits it just right, the olive drab catching a soft sheen, it almost feels alive again, ready to start, ready to move, ready to serve. There's a line often quoted among those who study these machines. The Jeep won the war because it could go anywhere. That's true, of course. But perhaps it's more accurate to say the Jeep won hearts because it refused to stop. It kept men alive, kept armies moving, kept hope connected across broken roads. In doing so, it became more than metal and rubber. It became a reminder of what persistence looks like in its purest form. As the years pass and the men who once drove them grow fewer, the Jeep remains, not only in museums or parades, but in fields, in barns, in the collective memory of a world that once depended on its strength. There's something deeply human about that, a reminder that even in the machinery of war, there can exist a spirit of endurance, of ingenuity, of quiet faithfulness. The Jeep never aimed to be a symbol, but in its honesty, it became one. And so, when we speak of the war, of its strategies, its leaders, its weapons, we might also remember the small machine that tied them all together, the one that carried the wounded, the weary, and the hopeful alike. It rolled through the worst of the century and came out the other side still running. And if you listen closely, in the hum of a modern engine, or in the wind over a restored Willys parked in sunlight, you might still hear its voice, the steady, unbroken rhythm of endurance. The Jeep that won the war didn't just conquer distance. It carried the idea that even in chaos, there is room for simplicity, for reliability, for the quiet heroism of things that just keep going. And that perhaps is its greatest legacy. Not the battles it saw, but the faith it inspired. A machine that by doing what it was built to do without fail, taught men something lasting about perseverance, about trust, and about the unassuming strength of the ordinary. The war ended long ago. The roads it once traveled have faded. The soldiers have gone gray, the factories have fallen silent. But the Jeep, the humble, unstoppable Jeep, still moves, still turns its wheels, still reminds us that history often rides not on grand gestures, but on small, steady ones that never stop.